Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Taylor Brana, and I want to welcome you to this amazing series that we have. So for you guys who do not know, we're going to be doing teaching in order to tell you the best tricks, the best tips, everything that you need to know to have an amazing podcast. So just so you guys know, beyond just this, SoMeDocs offers packages that help doctors build online resources like podcasts, courses, and content creation. So beyond just this show, if there's other things you're thinking about doing, SoMeDocs or doctors on social media, they can really teach you how to get a lot of different things set up. We live in a digital age. There's so much happening right now. The world is moving so quick, and it's really important to stay up to date on a lot of this stuff that's happening. I have some amazing physicians with me today. You guys might have saw that intro video. I love it, by the way. And so our physicians coming on today, they're physician podcasters. And so we're going to have a discussion about what makes an amazing conversation. So our two guests, I'm going to bring them on, and we're going to do some introductions here. So for today, below me on the screen, we have Dr. Colin Zhu. He is a board-certified family practice and OMT and lifestyle medicine physician. He is passionate about the intersection of medicine, food, and nutrition. Dr. Zhu trained as a chef and a health coach at the National Gourmet Institute for Health and Culinary Arts and the Institute for Integrative Nutrition following completion of his medical degree. He has a unique blend of medical knowledge with a wide audience, and Dr. Zhu launched the Chef Doc in 2017, an online wellness and lifestyle education platform, which has been featured in several publications. Dr. Zhu is an international speaker, the author of Thrive Medicine, How to Cultivate Your Desires and Elevate Your Life, and is the podcast host of Thrive Bites, in which he interviews the latest health and wellness experts about incorporating a plant-powered lifestyle, enhancing emotional wellness, and creating a thriving mindset. His latest venture is his signature event for 2021. It's a self-educational masterclass series, and it's called the THR5 Formula, where he combines inspiration, education, and practical tools on how to thrive. Here, you're going to learn the 5 pillars: food as medicine, functional fitness, relationships, community, and emotional resilience. So, Dr. Colin Zhu, thank you so much for being on with us today.
Thank you very much for having me. And it's always good to be back again on the SoMeDocs platform with, I know Donna behind the scenes, you as the host, and, Bradley being here. I'm very, very privileged and honored to be here.
Amazing. And you're doing so much, and I love food, so it's great to have someone who has the skills here. I'm absolutely terrible in the kitchen. But for our next guest, we have Bradley Block. He's an otolaryngologist, a head and neck surgeon from Long Island, New York, where he lives with his wife and 3 young sons. He is a partner at ENT and Allergy Associates, and he created the Physician's Guide to Doctoring podcast. It is a scintillating and engaging podcast where he interviews physicians and non-physician experts to help teach us what we should have been learning while we were busy memorizing the Krebs cycle. That's hilarious. The podcast is a practical guide for practicing physicians, physicians in training, and all allied health professionals. Topics range from personal finance to politics to improving interactions with patients to what every doctor should know about different specialties. You can find him at physiciansguidetodoctoring.com and on Twitter, and rarely on Instagram at Physicians Guide. You cannot find him on TikTok, Snapchat, Etsy, or on Pinterest, and you probably never will. I love this. He went to med school at SUNY Buffalo and graduated with research honors and went on to residency at Georgetown. He enjoys surfing. Yes, there's surfing on Long Island. Skiing. No, there is no skiing on Long Island. Smoking meats, exercising, throwing his sons across the pool, and finding any excuse to quote an 80s movie. Dr. Bradley Block, thank you so much for being on with us.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate the invitation, and it's great to be back with the both of you who have both been guests on the podcast. So it's always great to engage with the both of you. Thank you.
Awesome. So for the sake of time, let's get into this. Having an amazing conversation. So my first question is this: why do we even care when it comes to a podcast show or a streaming show? What is so important about having an amazing conversation?
I'll take this one. Well, for me, since all of my shows are interview, they're all about having an amazing conversation. If you're not having interesting conversations, then nobody's going to listen to your show, right? Like that is it. An interview is a conversation. It should be a conversation. Although a place where I admittedly could improve would be, it should be a more of a one-sided conversation. So you're really having the guest on for their expertise. And so I think one of the keys to that is sometimes getting out of our own way and making sure you're really letting the guest do what they do. So yeah, this having an amazing conversation, or at least an attempt at an amazing conversation, is what I do in every episode. So if it wasn't for that, there would be no episode.
Colin, what do you think?
I also have an interview show as well, and I totally piggyback on what Bradley is saying. And for me, it's really about gaining insights, gaining the stories, gaining why, people have either pain points or inspiration. I love digging deep into both of them. And for me, it's really about, what's the driving force for them to do what they do, whether it's showing up in their profession, whether it's, something that they're doing on the side, whatever the case may be. I love getting to the heart of who they are. So having amazing conversation is really the vehicle to be able to get through that. And, it goes beyond, like you said, we're in a digital age. It goes beyond the profile. It goes beyond the LinkedIn, biography. It gets to the heart of the person. And so I think it's super, super important. And, every way that, we can, improve as hosts, I would, speak for myself, the better, so we can get really good conversations going for our audiences.
Awesome. I love those responses. And I want us for a second to imagine we're in a time machine and we could go back in time to our first episode's recording. Okay. And I want you to really get this in your mind for a second. What did you guys do before? And what do you wish you had changed as soon as you started? And either of you can take this.
Oh, I'll take this.
Yeah.
So the first one, my first guest, he was a very dear friend and colleague, so it actually made it easier. It wasn't like, a cold call to someone. It's always good to have that rapport to begin with, right? I think for me in the beginning, what was different from then till now is really honing in and developing better interviewing questions, not just surface levels, quick points, things like that, but really getting good thought-provoking questions. So the guests, I like to ask them questions, especially seasoned guests that have been on, other interviews or publications and been podcast a lot, where you like them to kind of open up deeper, or maybe go into a certain area or topic that they haven't gone before, and that makes a more engaging conversation. So I think for me over time, it's just really honing in on that skill to develop better interviewing skills as a host.
Bradley, what do you think?
Well, to piggyback on what Colin was just saying, sometimes you'll have people on your show who have been on other shows. And I apologize, this isn't exactly answering the question, but I like that point that he just made, where you'll have someone on your show who's been on other shows, and you ask them a question, you realize you're getting the same exact answer that everybody else has gotten, and you've heard it before, and you've heard it a bunch of times before. So this is one thing that you can do to prep, is listen to them on other people's shows, and that'll allow you to take that extra step to be able to dig a little deeper. But back to the original question, the first guest on my show, I think, was my brother. And so this is just for all the physicians out there who are interested in starting a podcast. Like, your path, you've surrounded yourself your entire lives with people who are now experts, right? Everyone you went to college with is now a successful someone out there. Everyone you went to medical school with. So your life, you've got just tons of potential guests. You're surrounded by experts. So I use my own brother. He has a PhD in health policy, and we were talking about the Affordable Care Act. And so I did all this reading and I did all this research and I spent tons of time on it. And we barely talked about that much. Like it would have been hours and hours of conversation. So I would have, in retrospect, spent less time. So now, after doing 150 episodes, I'm able to be a lot more efficient with my time in terms of the research that I do in order to figure out what questions I want to be asking and realizing what questions we're going to have time for. So the other thing is you have to plan for how long you want your episode to be. And so if you're asking tons of questions, your episode's going to go on forever. Your listeners might not want to hear all that. So figuring out which are the most important questions, making sure you're going with those first. You got to triage, just like we do in medicine. You have to triage your questions, which are the good introductory questions, and then you really got to take that deep dive pretty quickly in order to get good material out of your guest without taking forever.
So that is a perfect transition into this question, which is, let's talk about prep. Okay, so I know some people are more free flow with their podcast. Maybe they're like, I don't do any research. I'm not going to look them up. I kind of know this and that about them. Let's hop into this. What are your guys' thoughts on what work you actually need to do? Like, let's get into the nitty gritty. Like, what are you exactly doing in terms of your preparation, or even before that, right? Like, maybe like it's not just prep on the guests, but did you have a thought process in regards to selecting the right guests, right? So what is your thought process in terms of the pathway that you go from nothing to them being on the show with you? Colin, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. And this is probably will be, covered in other episodes or other sessions after ours in terms of, you kind of start with, what is the purpose of the episode, right? So for me, I will mostly they're one-on-one guests, right? I have on occasion interviewed two. On one episode, I've actually interviewed 9 others. That was probably the most I've ever done. But you have to start with the why behind the purpose of the episode, whether it's a certain topic that you want to achieve and you find a guest that matches that topic, or it's in reverse where you interview the guests because they have something interesting or of interest to your audience, right? So there's no right or wrong. It just depends on which direction you go. And then you want to see, like, what do you want to get out of them? What do they bring to the table that you could ask that you can come up with, right? And I definitely agree with Bradley about before about you do want to take some time to research on what have they talked about before, and to make it different and to ask different questions. And I think it's always fun to, depending on your personality, I like the gift of gab and, just having, just shooting the barrel of just, conversation just to make it lighthearted and, free flowing, informal and engaging. Because I like to orient my conversations as if, you and I were having coffee or your beverage of choice across a table, and we're just, chatting. And I like to think about what makes them them, what makes them tick, what, for me, it's what gets them out of the morning, what drives them. And so, so a lot of it is, 2/3, 3/4 of it, I'm already prepared, but I leave a little bit of room for spontaneity in terms of, depending on what they say, right, or what they bring up, then I can go off of a tangent, with that. And it's good to have that play, of something scripted and having a little bit non-scripted. And, depends on your comfort level, depends on how organized and how stringent you want to be. But it's going to take some experimenting, especially if you are newer to podcasting.
So just a quick follow-up on that. So Colin, do you like go deep into your guests, and do you have all of your questions written out? Do you have like a plan in place, or like what are you doing there?
Yeah. So ahead of time, I give them, kind of like how we're set up, everything you need to do to log in, streamline any technicalities or any technology issues. And then I give them just 5 interview questions just as guidelines. So it gets them, already in the mindset of where I'm going to go, with questions. And they can be questions that they've, already have done before, or, they're questions that I personally want to know more of. And based off of their answers, I go into a sub, question. but that wasn't written. I just kind of go into it because it's just more, natural, just how like you just came up with a follow-up question off of my answer, so it
Right.
makes it more natural, and it makes them, because especially if I'm interviewing doctors, a common stereotype is like, we're too stiff or we're too robotic, and we just think, in terms of numbers and bullet points and, things like that. And I like to break that down. I want to showcase, especially my healthcare, guests, that, we're human at the end of the day. We have a heart, we have a lot of emotions, we care about things, we're passionate in things. And I like to draw that humanistic aspect of it. And, so whatever I can find, especially now, my podcast is more of an audio medium now. I do everything on YouTube now. Before the first 3 seasons, it was all audio. So now I have the ability to see people and use body language to kind of give me a little bit more in terms of which way I'm going as well.
Bradley, what do you think about prep and what Colin said?
So my prep, I totally agree. I think you need to be prepared. I think and I apologize. I don't apologize if I offend anyone with what I'm about to say. I think people that don't prepare for their guests are because they want to be, casual about it and think they can be more spontaneous. I think they're rationalizing their own laziness. Like I totally agree with what Colin's saying. You have to be able to go off script, but in order to do that, there needs to be a script, right? Like, so you don't have to be rigid about it, but you should have a guide. So the way that I do it, my process is I'll listen to their audiobook, preferably because I always listen on my commutes, or I'll listen to other interviews they've done, or both. And then when I get to wherever I'm going, I'll take a bunch of notes on potential questions that I have. And then before the interview, I'll compile all those notes, I'll organize them, and then I'll email them to the person I'm interviewing. But I make it very clear that I don't want them answering those over the email, because I've had a couple people before who've emailed me back answers to all of those questions, and I don't want to make more work for my guests, and I don't want them to. That also takes some of the spontaneity. But what you don't want to do is you don't want to sandbag one of your guests with a surprise question that either they're going to be offended by or they're just not comfortable answering, because that's going to mess up the flow. So I think it's important to prepare, to be organized, and to loop them in so they can at least think about them or clear the questions beforehand. Because if they have access to those questions, they're going to be able to give them a little more thought, and then they won't go, so I'm not sure. They were able to get their best question, their best answer possible.
So you like to send them maybe some sets of questions to think about, or at least process beforehand, so you can get more out of the conversation when you're on air.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, but it's a guide. Often we don't get to all the questions. Often, again, that's triage, right? You send them in a specific order so that you're getting, in case they end up going off the reservation a little bit and like way off script and taking you in a different direction, you're able to go there, but at least you've gotten your most important questions first.
So let's talk about questions, because that's, as an interviewer, that's going to be a really important aspect of the conversation, right? When you're interviewing, you're sort of guiding and steering. So what do you think, how do you evaluate what's an okay question or a mediocre question versus what makes a great question that lets someone really, respond well?
Well, go ahead, Brandon.
So one thing, make sure the question is a single question. I definitely do this, and I shouldn't. And I got this recommendation from a common friend of ours, Ryan Inman, who listened to a few of my episodes and said, you have this tendency to ask multiple questions at the same time. Ask a single question, let them answer that, and then go on from there. So one thing about asking a good question is make sure it's only one question. And then 2 is keep it pretty direct. Like you want to make sure that you're really giving the person that you're interviewing a lot of direction on where you want them to take it. Because if you're not specific about what you're asking, they might end up asking like a politician, right? They've got their agenda of what they want to say when they're on TV and someone asks them a question. They go with what they want to say, not with the question. And, everyone's got an agenda. So it's important that you be specific about really what your intention of this question is.
Colin, what do you think about good questions or strong questions?
Yeah, I agree with Bradley, because depending on the topic at hand, if you don't want to go too off script, your job as the host is not just interviewing questions, but you're kind of like the ringmaster of a circus, right? You have to keep everything in line. You have to keep everything, on the boat per se, and not totally derail them. You kind of have to guide them. And they're your guests. It's almost like you're bringing them into a virtual home, and you're having them there for a few moments in your home, and you want to take care of them. So that takes a lot of facilitation. It takes them a lot of preparation beforehand, making them feel comfortable. Similarly, to us, we gone on like a few minutes earlier, and asked them how their day is, because I started off my first couple seasons. Most of the guests I have, I already knew. They were people, mutual friends and colleagues. Sometimes family, and people that I knew in my local organizations of my profession. And then as time grew, and the podcast became picked up more traction, more notoriety, humbly speaking, I started getting guests from podcast agents and people who just found me on social media, and then you put them on, but you've never spoken to them. I've had one guest where I've never even had an email exchange, and typically I do. Either they're so busy or whatever the case may be, and I literally have not exchanged anything with them until literally they popped up on the screen. So it is my job to establish a rapport within like 3 minutes, and to figure out how they are. I like to get a sense of people's humor, to see like how rigid they are, how not rigid they are, so I know which way to go, and steer myself as well within their space. And so it's the questions need to be very direct, very specific, and it also allows them to free flow a little bit within what they already know. You don't want to ask a question that's totally off topic, that's something that's not in their scope or not in their wheelhouse, and throws them off. You don't want to see them like visibly thrown off. That's it wouldn't be that great for a guest. You know what I'm saying? So you definitely want to give them something in the realm of their wheelhouse. And if you could find something where you can go off topic a little bit, then yeah, take a chance. But just don't totally derail them. So the more specific, the better.
Yeah, I mean, the only, I'm sorry, one second, Bradley. The only thing I would say is there's some podcast shows where they're trying to be antagonistic, or maybe that's part of your style is to challenge. So maybe there's, I agree with you. I'm more of I like to kind of keep on the positive train, but I'm sure there's also other shows where the goal is to have these sort of intense debates. So it really also depends, I think, as you're saying, you kind of want to hug your guests through this journey, but at the same time, it just depends on your style. But I'm sorry, I stopped Bradley from saying something.
So yeah, no, that's a good point. That our shows are generally educational, so we don't have occasion to be confrontational like that, right? Like if you're going to have someone on your show that you're not going to be buying, like if someone is peddling supplements on my show, I wouldn't have them on to begin with, because I'm not going to be right. I'm just going to be challenging them over and over, and that's going to come off as antagonistic. It just doesn't sit well. Like if you want to do that, then have a different person on your show to be discussing that. We're not like Joe Rogan here, where this is his shtick. You know what you're getting into, but this is what his audience is looking for too. Our audiences are looking for education, so they're not looking for that type of antagonism, for lack of a better word. But the other thing was, Colin mentioned rapport building, which is something that at the beginning, I would have these phone conversations with my guests beforehand, if it wasn't someone that I already had a relationship with, right? they'd go on for a long time, and it became so time consuming that I just said, yeah, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm sorry. I'm not
You might as well
going to
just have
schedule
that
it.
as an interview right
Exactly.
then and there.
Exactly. You're losing, because then you're losing some of that spontaneity that comes with
Exactly.
just having a conversation. And so it's the second time we're having the same conversation. It loses some of that. And also just efficiency. I've got a lot on my plate, as does everyone who's listening to this. And I don't have time to just sit around and talk and have the same conversation twice. So I stopped doing that. So for rapport building, honestly, there's not much of it that I do aside from just for the first couple of minutes before the show having a conversation. Can we turn the interview on you, Taylor? Can we ask you what you do for rapport building?
I just like, in terms of rapport building, like I think it's really important to have guests on actually beforehand and just chat about whatever for the first 5 to 10 minutes beforehand, kind of like what we did. Cause it's especially because I like to do these live a lot, and that's more recent for me. But I think that the biggest thing about rapport is, and especially it actually happens beforehand, like being consistent with what you were saying before, right? Like if there are any requests, making sure you have a professional looking brand, make sure that you're presenting yourself professionally so that they trust you the whole time, right? So the trust is a big thing. Like they have no idea who you are. They have to join your ecosystem. And so if you're developing that professional image, but on top of that, you follow up every time, you make sure that everything's organized, you hop onto the call beforehand, you guys get a good vibe or feeling about how you're communicating, and then you hop into the interview, it's so smooth, right? Like, you think about, you brought up like Joe Rogan, like I'm sure those guys were hanging out for a couple hours before they even started recording. You know what I mean? So I think a lot of times it's that like just hopping straight into this world, this conversation, this something. And I think the rapport starts well before the actual joint moment of the interview. So I think as much exposure you have to each other beforehand, I think that's going to sort of massage or hug them into this experience that they're going to have actually recording. That's what I would say.
And I would definitely piggyback on that, if I may, is I think that to me, that determines how the energy, of that single episode will go, you know what I'm saying? And if you don't know that as a newer podcaster, I would say, just think about how you are in a cocktail hour before COVID, right? Like, how do you conduct yourself, during like a cocktail or, just, out and about with friends or colleagues? And are you a person that initiates a conversation? Do you have like an open dialogue with a stranger just like out of nowhere, or are you a little bit more reserved and you hang back a little bit and you just kind of observe the conversation, the environment? So you can kind of use that analogy to decide whether, okay, if I'm more reserved, then maybe I want to do a little bit more like off camera to build up a little bit more rapport so you can feel comfortable and my guests feel comfortable. And because you are facilitating, they're going to be based off of you. You're going to be setting that tone. So it's important to make sure that you're comfortable as well. If you feel like you're a little bit more, reserved or shy, just not at first, you know what I'm saying? So, but if you have the gift of gab, for example, you can just go off, from, a cold call, then have at it, so you kind of have to kind of experiment a little bit. It's all about experimenting.
So guys, for the sake of time, first off, I want to appreciate both of you for being on today. I'm sure you guys realize that went by super fast. So I think we're probably in for a part 2 at some point, because the sort of meta idea of like how to podcast, I think we're all sort of interested in figuring out together, because it's this evolving process. We're all doing it, and people are just getting better, and it becomes more interesting. And there's so many different ways to take it. But for the sake of time, Bradley, let's start with you. How can people find you?
So I'm at Physicians Guide on Twitter and Instagram, and my website is physiciansguidetodoctoring.com. So you can just use that as a jumping off point for any podcast player.
And Colin?
You can find my website at chefdoczoo.com, and you can find my podcasts on every platform, especially Apple and Spotify. And now I have everything on YouTube now, so you could just type in the Chef Doc there to be able to find my stuff.
So guys, thank you so much for joining me. I sincerely appreciate it. This idea of how to have an awesome conversation it just, we keep figuring it out as we go. Like I'm like 200 plus episodes in. I know we're all at different stages of this, but I feel like there's so much to figure out, and that's why it's artistic. That's why it's fun. You know, you're talking about culinary, you know, with food, it's the same thing, right? But everything, there's an artistic side to this. I think that's what gets us really excited about podcasting. And guys, I mean, thank you. This was awesome. So I'm going to actually go into a little bit of a teaching lesson now. I want to thank you guys for being on today. And I hope we do a part 2.
Me
Thank you
too.
for
That'd
having
be
us.
great. Thanks a
All
lot.
right. Take care,
Thank you.
guys. So everyone watching right now, we're going to hop into our next segment of the show. And that's going to be me going over a lot of stuff that we might have mentioned, but I want to really just dissect these pieces of how to have an amazing conversation. So if you're just hopping in now, I'm going to be fielding some questions, and I'm going to be going through these different topics. If anyone has a question, or if anyone wants to send a question or a comment afterwards as well, even if it's not live, please comment and I'll respond, or one of our guests might respond. So this will allow you to really get more juice out of this. So first, before I go into the lesson, let me see if there was any questions that came up as we were going here. Let's see. I see one, which was this. How did you decide on the duration and length of your episodes? So this is a very important question. This starts right at the beginning. And the honest truth is it depends on your style. It depends on your show. It depends on what you want to do. I've heard of people doing, like, for example, one of my podcasts, we purposefully keep it short. I call it the potato chip method. I keep it between 3 to 5 minutes. And the reason why for that show I decided on that is it's a show specific to medical students learning about boards. And I wanted them to have that one question that they learn information about, and then they listen to the explanation, and then boom, the episode's done. And it's like a bag of potato chips. They love it, and then they keep eating it. So then they listen to more episodes. That's actually like a kind of a trade secret, I would say, because you actually can get way more downloads if you actually shorten up your episode length. But if you think about some of the most popular podcasts, like the Joe Rogan podcast is a great example. It's one of the biggest ones. He goes on for 3.5 hours, 4 hours sometimes. So episode length is going to be based on your time, based on what the amount of time you can put in. It's going to be based on what you want from the show. In general, the longer the episode, the deeper you can go into details and crevices of a conversation that you might not have been able to get at if you were doing a short episode. So you have to really just think about it. And maybe you start off your show with a lot of length, and then later you decide that maybe it wasn't for you, and you go shorter. So you can test it out. That's the thing about podcasting. It's an art. You get better over time. You don't have to play in the same sandbox the whole time. That's just my opinion, but that's what I think. All right, so let me go through this lesson for you guys. It's going to be top tips for having an amazing conversation. We hit a lot of these points. I just want to really drive a lot of this home for our listeners out there. I want to really squeeze the value out of this time for you. Okay, so let's get into this. The first important thing that comes to my brain when it comes to this is the setting and the internet connection. The best conversations happen live, in my opinion. If you can record a podcast or a video interview in person, it would be optimal. However, because of COVID and because of everything going on, you got to do it usually through the screen. So I really actually enjoy streaming live. I think it gives another different feeling to it. So I'm all about doing StreamYard. This platform we're using is called StreamYard. No problem, telling you about it. And so it gives you that live component. I can see people's faces. I can interact with them. And I think it develops a stronger sort of connection. And with that being said, the internet connection that you have is super important. So make sure all of your stuff is plugged in properly. Make sure that you are wired in, cabled into your router. Make sure that that's all set up. Make sure you have good equipment. We'll talk about equipment later, but that's super important. And I see that there was another. Okay, so no other questions so far. The next one, choosing an interview guest and choosing an interesting guest. Your show, depending on what you do, you're going to want to have an awesome guest, but that guest is dependent on your style, your belief system, what you're trying to achieve, all of those different things. So when it comes to choosing an interesting guest, this will be later down the line. We're going to talk about this, but in a bigger picture, look at this. Having an amazing conversation starts with having an interesting person or a person you find interesting, right? Because you wouldn't have them on your show if you didn't want to ask them questions. So you really want to be cognizant of who you're having onto the show, because again, having a great conversation, having great content starts with someone who has something to say, someone who's interesting. So you want to have a process of thinking about how you're getting your guests on and who those guests are going to be. Research. Research is super important, okay? Like has been said when we had our guests on earlier, if you don't do your research, you might not get all of the juice out of the conversation. And I think the best way to research is to figure out what you authentically want to get from your guest. What do you want to learn? What do you want to get out of this conversation? You want to think about who it is that you're speaking to. You want to think about your audience. You want to think about your show. And you want to think about the questions that will let you get the most juice out of your time. You only have this guest for 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 1 hour. You might not get to have them again. So what questions do you really want the answers to? You don't have to start with the basic intro and this and that. I mean, of course, it's important to at least have a bit of an introduction, but you can just get right into the questions that are important to you, especially if it's a big person, someone that's well known. People know about this person. You don't have to go into a full spiel, especially if you only got 10 minutes, 15 minutes. So do your research, ask the questions you want to ask. And like was said by Dr. Bradley Block, triage your questions, choose your favorites, make sure you get to them because you only have a little bit of time. So that's super important. And then I see another comment here. I'm just going to hop it up. I decide duration based on what questions I have and how much stamina I have. Triage. Most important questions first. I believe this is probably Dr. Bradley Block. So he's just commenting. He decides duration based on how much he can put into it, and he chooses the most important questions first. That's absolutely super important. Okay. I'm going to throw this one up on here. Pre-interview prompts. Okay. So if some people, I used to do this, I'm not doing it as much, but if you want to have a guest on, but you want to make sure they have an understanding of what's about to happen, you can hop on a phone call with them for 10 to 15 minutes, give them the spiel, and you can also ask them for prompts. What are some of your favorite stories that you would like to share with our listeners? What are moments of difficulty? What are moments of challenge? What are things that inspired you in your life? What are pivotal moments or shifts in your life? So you can have prompts. You can throw them an email, just that was mentioned. Have them brainstorm so that way when they enter the conversation, they're ready to go. Okay, so having those a pre-interview or some prompts that they're ready to start to think about the interview, that's going to really get the most juice out of the conversation. Okay. I see here, Francis Yu, outsourcing editing, definitely. I think I'm missing a little bit of context on this one, but I will say that having an outsource of editing for your podcast is definitely a nice hack. And that's going to be important to having a great conversation as well. So the other thing to get most out of your conversations or podcasts or interviews is asking strong questions. So what is a strong question? A question, if you ask closed-ended questions, sometimes it's important, but really strong questions usually are open-ended, and they are going to focus on this. They're going to focus on story. Human beings are tribal, and we come from a passage of time when we started to teach people about our lives, and when we started to teach people through tribes, it was always through stories. So the stronger the story, the more impactful the question can be and your conversation is going to be. When you hear a story, you have descriptions, you have a beginning, middle, and end. You have a lesson that's hidden in there usually. And so stories are really, I think, great parts or aspects of having a great set of questions. Some questions are more direct, sometimes they're factual, sometimes it's more process, but story is super important. And strong questions, again, like has been said, is triaging your questions. Choose the ones that really you are invested in. Choose the ones that you're interested in. If you're authentically interested, it's going to come off in the interview. Let's see here. The next one is going to be audience. When you ask questions or have a great conversation, you want to think about your audience. Who's listening? Who are the people that you want to target? What is your podcast about? Because your questions need to be geared towards not just yourself, but your audience. And ideally, you want to be invested in your podcast and you want your audience to be excited about the information, right? So think about your audience when you're asking the questions. That's going to be very important in how you frame the questions and the way you're going to be doing things. Stay present to your reactions, feelings, and responses. I think the best conversations I've had, and I'm sure other physicians and other podcasters will say the same thing. It happens when you're present. It happens when you're in the moment. It happens when you have real feelings that come up. It happens when you're like, wow, that was interesting. Can you tell me more about this? It's an authentic response from internally when you really are actually interested in what the person has to say. When you have a real response, when you have real reactions, that's going to allow you to go deep into where you want to go next. And so staying present with your feelings, staying present with your guests' feelings, responding in a way that's authentic, that's super important to having an engaging conversation. And I'm going to finish off with this. You cannot have an awesome interview if you're not in a great state of mind. So by working on yourself, by improving your energy, by improving your state, by taking care of yourself, by reversing burnout, by getting into more of a thriving mindset, by being more energetic, you're going to have better conversations. So by improving yourself, by improving your energy, by improving your state, you are going to have an amazing conversation. So guys, there was a lot of tips in there, a lot of tricks, a lot of thinking. There's more to it, but those are just some of the top things I think about. I see a couple more comments here. I'm going to throw this one up. Re-asking a question from before. If you were starting your podcast from scratch for the first time, would you do it yourself or get guidance? Podcast launching, help program / coaching. Okay. If I were to do it again, and I started from scratch, I would say, especially in 2021, I think if you have the means, if you have some money, if you're willing to invest, I would definitely get someone who knows what they're doing to coach you. And the reason I'm saying that is because there's a lot of things you do not know that can only be known from someone who's done it, right? So it's the same thing like residency. If you want to be a surgeon and you want to learn how to do an appendectomy, you're not going to go in for the first time and go for it. There's ways to get set up. There's the correct tools. There's the correct procedures. There's nuances, things that you might not think about. You want to have someone to get you through that. I think absolutely, if you have the means, you can do it. You can also do it by yourself, but you're just going to be missing out on guidance that will help 10x your speed in terms of getting to a comfort zone and a level of success and level of comfort in your interviewing and podcasting faster. And if you're willing to trade money for speed, I think you should absolutely get help with your podcast. And this actually segues perfectly because doctors on social media or SoMeDocs, we have a build a podcast service. So this question is perfect because if you want, I can build out your podcast and I can help coach you. And I'm sure there's other people out there that will also help with this. There's other services out there. I'm not saying that we're the only one, but I am saying that if you want, we can 10x what you're doing. We can speed things up. We can make you sound more professional. We can get you set up so you don't have to go through all those hurdles. I definitely have improved over time. And I think it's absolutely important to have coaching. And another comment here is 10x speed is a lot. Yes, you can absolutely 10x or more just because there's so much you just don't know. You don't know what you don't know. And so having that coaching and that guidance is going to be super important. All right, guys. So we went through a lot in this episode. I really wanted to thank my guests, Drs. Colin Zhu and Bradley Block, for being on with me. They're awesome. I've had them on I've actually need to still have Colin on my podcast, but they're just great guys. And as you can tell, we love doing this. So if you have an interest, if you have a desire to podcast, please come join us in this community. It's awesome. We learn a lot. We grow in different facets of our lifestyle and things that we're looking at and thinking about. So come join us. Thank you so much for watching this stream, and we'll see you on the next one.